Hi, it's Paul. In this clip, we're going to look at regenerative, reactive, reparative type change. The examples I'm going to show you are all cervical samples, so thin preps, but most of the changes I describe can be generalised to any sort of sample from any type of tissue, like lung, for example, or bladder. And most of these occur in response to external stimuli, be that inflammation, trauma, say chemotherapy or radiotherapy. So here is a cervical sample. We've got a large group of cells which have darker enlarged nuclei. You can see they're forming a fairly cohesive group, and down this end you can see the cells appear squamoid. They've got centrally placed nuclei, fairly dense cytoplasm, and pretty much all the nuclei are in focus at once. So this is quite a flat sheet with a squamous appearance to it. Down here we have really well-defined cell borders and dense cytoplasm like you'd expect in squamous cells. And in this area you can see quite a lot of neutrophils. Up here you can see some cell borders amongst the cells, and again they're looking definitely squamous, a bit like immature squamous cells. Down at the bottom of the group here you can see the nuclei are probably clearer. They are fairly uniform in size, and notice that the NC ratio is fairly low, so they're quite well spaced apart, and that indicates that there's a fairly low NC ratio to the cells. A bit of binucleation. Finally, this is a lovely example of a group of reparative cells. So I'm focusing up and down slightly here. You can see there's at most 2 nuclei deep. The nuclei are quite enlarged compared to the intermediate cell on the top right there, but very bland chromatin again, so it's very even, fine chromatin. Nucleoli, sometimes multiple in all cells, a nice round, smooth nuclear membrane, very little nuclear overlapping, so once again quite a low NC ratio to these cells, and they're very cohesive. So in summary, repair cells are usually cohesive. That's a really key feature. And they form flat monolayered groups, so not much depth of focus. Nuclei are fairly uniform usually. They may be enlarged, sometimes quite enlarged, but they're generally speaking round, oval with a smooth nuclear membrane. Bi- and multinucleation is quite common. Sometimes you'll see cytoplasmic vacuolation as well. They have typically a very hypochromatic nuclei, so nuclei that are not dark staining and don't stand out very well from the cytoplasm. That's not always true. Sometimes, as in one of these cases, you can see fairly coarse chromatin. The key feature, another key feature of them, is very prominent nucleoli that are present in all nuclei. And remember, there's not much crowding, so you don't have nuclear overlapping, still have good polarity. Cytoplasm is quite variable, so sometimes it's difficult to say if they're squamous or glandular. Sometimes that's more obvious. And often you'll see the cells forming like a squamoid sheet, so with cell borders apparent in between the groups. But typically they have a fairly low NC ratio, so the nuclei are well spaced apart. And often it's got an inflammatory background, so there'll be inflammatory cells, often neutrophils, either overlying the cells or in amongst them. And finally, you've got to think about the differential diagnoses. And because the major differential with repair is actually malignancy, then you have to be careful, and particularly careful if the reparative, regenerative cells that are present are the only or the major cell type that are present. That is a worrying sign. If there are single cells that show the same features, then you must be careful as well, because repair is, generally speaking, very cohesive. And finally, if any of the groups show complexity in terms of depth of focus, say more than 3 nuclei deep, then you need to think again and entertain the idea that this could be a malignancy that you're dealing with.